Hey everybody, welcome to our training on managing service and parts inventory. Murray Voth here from RPM Training. This is going to be a 2-chapter section. We're going to talk about managing service first and then do a separate video on managing parts. These are some of the main key performance indicators that we're going to be covering in this section of this class. So we're going to start with mechanical gross profit. The benchmark for mechanical gross profit is 60%. So what is mechanical gross profit? Well, mechanical gross profit is the combination of service and parts gross profit. Oh, by the way, I need to introduce a concept here. I no longer use the word labor when I talk about labor and parts. I use the word service. Some years ago, a friend of mine inspired me to change the language around this because labor is something that you charge for. It is about the input, the cost, and that we're passing that on to the customer, kind of negative. Whereas service is what we offer. It's the output of what our company gives, and then we charge for services rendered. Professions like engineering firms use the term services rendered and invoice for services rendered. We feel that it's a much more professional perspective on that. So you will get used to hearing me use the word service and parts. There's a couple of other language changes that will be taught as we proceed through the class. Now, mechanical gross profit is the combination of service and parts, does not include tires, sublet accessories, and materials and consumables. We measure this separately so that we can get a better comparison to benchmarks and to other shops when we do our coaching practices. Now you notice I also use the term materials and consumables. That is my terminology for shop supplies. I find that materials and consumables is a better way of communicating what we're charging people for, the things that we use when we work on their vehicles. Another concept that will be coming up is I no longer use the word oil change. I use the word maintenance service because oil change has been so diluted as a price point. Maintenance service is much more professional and much more profitable when you package maintenance services. So we're aiming to achieve a 60% mechanical gross profit, combination of service and parts. We want to see how we're going to break that down. But before we do that, we want to look at something called a service to parts ratio. The benchmark or the guideline for this is 55% service and 45% parts. Now, if you're not exactly where you need to be, there's probably nothing wrong with your numbers. The more heavy duty work that you do, heavy trucks and highway stuff like that and heavy equipment, the harder it is to get this ratio because your parts are so expensive and they're so big. So this is kind of a general guideline. If you get yourself to 50-50, you're generally doing fairly well. 55-45 is that ideal world where we get you that mechanical gross profit of 60%. So here's how it breaks down. We have a little shop here that's doing $25,000 in revenue in a month. They are at a 70% gross profit here of service. They're at 45% on parts. These are the total gross profits that they get, so total revenue, gross profit, and you can see that their margin is 55%, and you can see that they are the reverse, 45% service and 55% parts. It's really important to know that we're not selling less parts, we're just collecting better on our service revenue because that's an area that we tend to give away much too easily in our business. So let's have a look here at a shop that gets to 50-50. Now we're at $15,000 in service, $15,000 in parts. Margins remain the same, and you can see that we end up with a 57.5% overall mechanical gross profit. Doing a lot better, but still not quite at that 60% that we would like to achieve. When we finally get to this level of implementation, you'll see that we have $18,500 in service, $15,000 in parts. In order for us to get to that gross profit margin of 60, we have to tweak our parts from 45 to 47. In our next chapter, we're going to learn that our benchmark has a range. I work with 45 to 50. Ideally, when you get to that closer to that 50 range, you end up with the overall mechanical gross profit of 60% that we're trying to achieve. Now, folks, 55% is nothing to shake a stick at. 57.5 is healthy. 60 is that area that we're trying to reach. It takes time to get there. So how do we get going on improving our service gross profit margin? Well, we're going to talk about that margin by itself, and again, parts we will talk about in our next segment. The benchmark for service gross profit is 70%. I have been teaching this for a while. In my coaching circles, we are actually pushing that benchmark to 75% because we are seeing the ability to charge for parts is beginning to being some pressure on it in the marketplace. Working on EVs, we don't maybe have as many parts to replace on some of the basic services, which means that we have to find our gross profit somewhere, right? So we're going to be increasing the benchmark to 70% to industry as we use my clients as a case study for now. Anyways, working with 70%, let's use an example of a shop that's at $135 an hour service rate. And by the way, folks, when I choose that rate, I'm not saying that that's the rate you should be at. It's just a sample that I chose out of the air. I'm sure those of you listening will be in a range of 100 to 200 or more, right, for that piece. So the sample shop is $135. Their average technician wage is $41.10, which leaves $93.90 an hour left over. This is assuming that we are billing all of the 8 hours that technician worked that day. So on that assumption, $93 in gross profit divided by 135 in our price means that we achieve a 70% gross profit, but really only on paper. The next slide shows the reality of what this industry is challenged with. A former AIA study shows that the average shop in Canada produces 4.2 billed hours per technician per day. Now that study is dated. We're working with them to get a new study done. A more recent study done by a consultancy in the United States, kind of the auto care, the equivalent of AIA down in the States, found that it was creeping up to around 4.8, and a study done by a large parts company in the United States found that it was just over 5, which still means that it's not great, right? We're not billing out all 8 hours of the day. So this slide shows you the reality of what is actually happening in this industry. Our technician worked 8 hours, $41.10 an hour, which means that we paid out $328.80 in cost. If the shop only billed out 4.2 hours of technician time times $135 an hour, they collected $567 in sales. 567 divided or minus 328.80 leaves us with $238.20 in gross profit dollars. The 238.20 divided by the 567 is a gross profit of 42%. That is really challenging, folks, and this is a challenge in this industry. This is one of the reasons why we cannot attract well-trained technicians, because we can't afford these wages. Even the wages that I have on the screen here are probably quite high compared to some of the ones you might be used to in your marketplace, right? So the fact that we're not able to pay these wages means that we're not able to produce, and it just becomes a vicious cycle. So how do we fix this? Well, I'm going to leave you with quite a few solutions here as part of this course. The first thing that we want to do is understand something about our labor guides. Now, you'll notice I use the word labor guide rather than service guide because that's actually the title of that book. So this will be one exception to my term of using service rather than labor. From 2008 to 2013, there was a depreciation of 35% in the labor guides, and it has flatlined ever since. Now, you might ask the question, why would we have this big depreciation in our guides in that period of time? Well, you need to understand, where do our labor guides come from? Where do those times come from? Well, they come from the car manufacturers. So if we think back historically 2007, 2008 was the Great Recession. We as Canadian taxpayers bailed out GM and Chrysler, and I've discovered that one of the largest expenses a car manufacturer has is the fees they pay their dealers for warranty. Because they were in financially strapped times, they began to cut the times to their dealers and how much the dealers were able to charge them for warranty work. So how does this work? Well, speaking to a former Chrysler employee in the last 18 months or so, they explained to me that it basically goes like this. Brand new vehicle, no rust, no grease, no dirt, no mud. All the covers are off of that component, and especially in the case of engine work, the engine is actually on an engine stand. Technicians are trained with a factory-trained video. All of their tools are laid out for them, and then they take the average of the time with a stopwatch of two technicians doing, say, for example, the remove and replace water pump. So now they get a factory warranty time of 0.8. Then that car manufacturer multiplies the factory time by a factor, and these are not always published anywhere. And that factor comes up with what's called a customer pay time. So that 0.8 warranty might become a 1.7 or 1.5 for what they call customer pay. And then the brands that we use, Mitchell and All Data and Motor and Chilton, they buy that information from the car manufacturers. So whatever happens in the car manufacturer's world affects all of you. In fact, now that everything is becoming cloud-based, my clients are telling me that some of the labor guides change from even 1 month to the next. So for example, for a while there was a lot of warranties on GM air conditioning condensers. Book time used to be over 4 hours to do a GM condenser. Recently, if you look, it's come down to 1.5. As those dealer technicians did more of them and got faster at them, right, and they were submitting all these warranty claims, the manufacturer got wind of it and began to drop the times to those dealer technicians to reduce their cost. And so that now affects your guides. So we do need to use the guides. We need to trust them to some degree. Otherwise, we're just shooting from the hip, making things up. But how do we compensate for this? Well, one of the ways we compensate is to adjust for this depreciation, and to take into account the age of the vehicle, we use the following calculation. A vehicle that is 0 to 2 years old, generally we would use book time. However, having said that, you can have a 1-year-old vehicle with 70,000 kilometers on it because it's a high-use vehicle, and that, of course, gets more difficult to work on because of the abuse. So we would then bump something with higher kilometers into the next range. A 3 to 5-year-old vehicle, we add 0.1 per hour. A 6 to 8-year-old vehicle, we add 0.2 per hour. And 9 and older, we add 0.3 per hour. And by the way, folks, we keep these wins. If we find that our technicians continue to beat the times or finally beat the times again, like they did in the old days, we do keep that win. And I will explain in a few slides from now the ethics and the morals of the way we use guides with our most experienced technicians. All right. So I have a tool for you, and if you put a request into the powers that be, when you're listening to this, we can send you this Excel spreadsheet. The way it works is you would put your service factor into here, 135. You put in the time from the guide into here, and then it calculates what you would charge. Again, we have a less than 60,000, right? Less than 120. So you could bump up that vehicle into here, and it automatically does the math for you. Now, this is just to offset for the depreciated labor guides. Things like mud and rust and other seized conditions will be as requested from the technician. Additional time would need to be added for that. Now, again, having shown you this, there's many brands of your shop management system that allow you to program this feature into the system so it automates it for the advisors and you don't need to use a spreadsheet. However, if you have some of the brands that don't do it, you could have this spreadsheet running on your desktop and the advisor could do some quick calculations. We also want to add an estimating factor. Too many times we get into a job and things go over, things break, right? Things like that. And so what we want to do is we want to add an estimating factor of 10% for rust, corrosion, seized and broken bolts, or other unexpected problems within reason. I'll explain that within reason here in a minute. The key one about this is that if we don't need it, we don't keep it. We're going to use this as a wow factor. The idea here is that our estimates, let me reverse that. Our invoices are always less than the estimate that we gave our customer. The driving public is so frustrated when they come in to pay a bill and it's more than what they were told. In our case, we're making a commitment that is going to be less, and by using an estimating factor, it helps us achieve that. Now, I'm not talking about just adding this to, intakes and exhaust manifolds and engines and things like that. I'm talking about adding this to anything, to a maintenance service, to a tire repair, because you just never know when you might need an extra patch, or you never know when you might need a different oil filter that maybe you didn't price out properly, and you don't have to call the client back for that. It reduces the number of return phone calls. Now, at the end here, it says, if a serious difference is encountered, the customer needs to be phoned back and given an updated estimate, right? You take off the intake and you discover that the intake manifold is cracked. Well, that's not going to be covered by a 10%. Now, I know with technology today, you are generally doing a lot of communicating with your clients via email and text. And so when you send them estimates, you're giving them, to the dollar, to the penny. But over the phone, there can still be miscommunication. I remember back in the days with my shop, I gave somebody an estimate for $467.22. When they came to pick up the car and pay, they remembered it being $422.67. So, I jokingly call that invoice dyslexia. So over the phone, I recommend that we round to the nearest 50. In the case of my $467.22, I would have said to the client, your total today is going to be less than $500. On a larger invoice, I would say your total today is going to be less than $1,250. Easy number for both of you to remember, no mistakes, easy to write down, less chance of miscommunication. Now, you noticed I used the phrase, your total today will be less than. We're going to use that phrase because we are committing to being less than the estimate we're giving. You could use the phrase, your total today will be up to $500. Well, you've just told somebody that you're going to spend all $500. So it's really important that we remember to say your total today will be less than $1,250. And it just makes those conversations at the end of the day so much smoother. Well, how about learning how to use an actual labor guide? When I have done these classes, either live in person or live online, when I actually have an audience and I can ask the question, I ask people, how many of you have actually been formally trained in the use of a labor guide? And I will tell you, I'm lucky if I get 1 out of 20 people that have actually been taught how to use these. Now, of course, we don't use the books anymore. We're basically using websites, cloud-based information, makes it so much easier. But again, all of the instructions on how to use these are always quite hard to find, or maybe not even available in an easy place. So what you see on the screen here is a scan of the opening page of a guide. I've opened the cover. I was going to scan it, and you know how heavy those old books were, and I just about broke my scanner. So I've just typed out in the presentation the wording right out of the book. These first next 3 or 4 slides are right out of the Chilton Labor Guide. So let's take a look. This is right out of Chilton. This manual is a guide for computing fair labor times, but it is not intended to be unconditional. What has happened is as we began to use these guides, and maybe we even used them to compete with each other 50, 60 years ago, we taught the consumer to use these as a weapon against us. And that's what they were not intended to be. They were intended to be internal documents that we used internally. There is no authority, there is no province, no state, no government that says you have to run by this. This is a guide. Even the fleet companies that try to hold you accountable to these guides have no legal ramifications to do that. Now, if you want their business, you have to play along to a degree, and that's a discussion for another class one day about how we can overcome some of these challenges with fleet and commercial. But in the meantime, we all need to understand that these are just a guide. They are not intended to be unconditional. There are many variations between the way different service providers are equipped or perform the same job. Labor times are based on the law of averages. They are not set according to the best technician or the technician in training. They're a blend. Severe service times. Now, this brand happens to have severe service times. Other brands do not. But these principles that are listed here are the same in Mitchell and some of the other brands. Extra labor time should be considered when the vehicle exhibits advanced age, high mileage, lack of maintenance, abuse, or has operated in a climate that creates extra effort needed to free up seized bolts, replace broken fasteners, remove rust, degrease, and clean parts. Additional time should be added when more than normal road testing is required. Suggested severe service times are displayed for your use as needed. So there you go, folks. You are allowed to increase what you charge based on what you see on that vehicle, right? Legal, ethical, and moral. Another question that I ask in my live classes is, does anybody know what the letter C stands for? And again, one or two people might know. They kind of mumble, well, is that not the technician's skill level? And they're exactly right. So, in this book, there's 3. In Mitchell, there's 4. All right? A is highly skilled, multiple certifications, usually a master tech. We would expect them to get the job done pretty quickly. B, skilled, 1 or more certifications, right? A good mechanical technician. And then C is a semi-skilled apprentice technician working towards certification. So you remember I said a few slides ago that when we quote out something for 2.5 and we beat the time, say for example our technician does it in 1.8, that we keep the 2.5. Now many of you are familiar with that and you do it. If I ask you, how do you justify that if you're challenged on it? Well, you'll talk about how you've invested in training or you've invested in the equipment to make you faster. You'll talk about how you've done 1,000 of them so that you can get fast. You'll talk about the first one took you 7 hours. And these are all ways that you justify. And you're on the right track to a degree, but the buying public is still going to sort of push back on that, right? Some of you have a hard time charging the 2.5, even though your technician's done it for 1.8. And I'm going to give you the training on why we can ethically and morally do that, and some ways that we could actually present this to our clients if in fact we do get challenged on this information. So here's the full screenshot of that section of the guide. Remove and replace water fuel pump. It is a level C, an apprentice technician. Factory warranty time is 1.3. Book time is 1.9. Severe services 2.2. If you don't use this brand, my multiplier for this vehicle that I'm looking at would be 2.5 hours. Now here's the logic behind how labor guides were created. We would expect an apprentice to take 2.2 to 2.5. It's not an A-level technician doing this. It is implying that an A-level technician would do it in less time. So the 1.8 is fine. We still charge the 2.2 or the 2.5. Here's the math on it. Using the 2.5 guide, hourly rate of $135 an hour, without worrying about parts and materials and taxes, it's $337.50 is what I'm going to quote you for the service of this re and refuel pump. Apprentice takes 3.5 hours. 3.5 times 96.43 is $337.50. Journey person takes 1.8. 1.8 at 187.50 is $337.50. The price is the price is the price. Now, we don't have the ability to always be adjusting the apprentice rate, or the journeyman rate. In businesses where they bill straight time, they do that. Plumbers, electricians, engineers, people like that, They bill straight time. Every minute that those technicians are working, they're billing it out. But what they will do is they will change the rate for the time. So you will see a plumbing firm will have 135 an hour for a journey person, and they'll have 85 an hour for a second-year apprentice, but they bill straight time. An engineering firm would be similar. In our world, because we don't do straight time work, and because we're always working on different makes and models, different production dates, different systems and processes, it's very difficult to have a fixed journeyman rate and a fixed apprentice rate because of the variability of the work that we do. So the labor guides, the way they control this is by using one hourly rate and then adjusting by how you quote, right? If you beat the time, you make more money. If you break even, great. If an apprentice is doing it, they cost you less anyways. Now you might say to yourself, what happens if I do get cornered by a customer on this question? Well, I was taught a role play by my coach years ago to help explain that with people, because you do have the odd person who knows about labor guides, who will pin you in a corner, or they'll time you on their watch in the shop, and they become very difficult to deal with. And so the role play goes like this, right? Customer says, how much are you going to charge me? Are you going to charge me how long it takes? Or are you going to charge me book time? And I'm going to say, well, sir, the estimate you have received, you're going to be charged $337.50 plus the part plus the taxes. Now, who would you like to work on your vehicle, sir? And the customer's going to go like, what do you mean? Well, I said, I've got my one apprentice over here, John. He's a second year, does great work. It's going to probably take them 3.5, 4 hours because this is, only the second one they've done. Or I've got Susan over here. She's got her journey person ticket. She's got 30 years experience. Chances are she's going to do it in 1.5 and 1.8 hours. Who'd you like to work on it? Well, I want Susan. Well, it's going to be $37.50. So it's the same price either way. Yeah. You're going to be okay with that because Susan's rate is $187.50 on this particular job, right? Now, did I do that role play a lot? No, maybe twice in my career. One of the key things is that if you give people estimates before you start, if you give them estimates all in, this sample here is about just the service, but add everything together, taxes and everything, and you meet their expectations about when the vehicle is going to be ready, you rarely have challenges. If you have cheap customers coming in or people that are financially challenged, of course, that's a different conversation, but that has to do with your marketing and the type of client that you're attracting. So folks, I hope this helps with standing up for the time when your technician beats it and keeping that win. Another concept that we need to talk about that will lead towards a better gross profit on service is talking about your sold hours per work order or per invoice. The industry average is 1.1. The benchmark is 3. The average vehicle in Canada, when inspected properly, taking all maintenance and deferred work into account, needs approximately $850 in repairs per visit 3 times a year. Right, just a statistic. That's based on some pretty good data, but it's pretty reasonable. When I match it up to real life, it's actually not that far off. If you take the $850 and divide it half service and half parts, you're going to get $425 in service and $425 in parts. You take the service component and divide it by the $135 an hour. You can do this math with your own rates. It would show you that we're looking for 3.1 sold hours per work order is what we're trying to achieve. So how do we achieve this? Well, first of all, let's talk about how to calculate it, and then we'll get into how to actually improve it. All right? So here's an example of a shop that has $50,000 in monthly service revenue. They divide it by their service rate for 370 hours, divide it by the number of invoices they did that month, and this one shows that they did 1.8 sold hours per invoice. They have an opportunity to improve from 1.8 to 3. How do we improve it? Well, we're going to talk shortly here about the 400% rule, but just before we do that, we need to talk about average work order size, which is really directly related to the billed hours per work order. All right? The average work order size or the billed hours per work order both come from how well the team did in informing and educating the client on the condition of the vehicle and the work that was ultimately purchased. All right? So if we're doing good inspections, if we're tracking the maintenance needs of that vehicle, we're presenting that information, Whatever we get is what we've got, and that shows the result of our implementation. The math on average work order size is you take your total monthly sales divided by the number of work orders, and this shop here has $433.33. Now, before we get to how to improve it, and I know I've said this now once, I have a couple more things that you need to understand that really impact this. All right? The number of work orders per advisor has a huge impact on the ability to improve the work orders, the average work order size. So let's just take a look at JT, 1,075 average work order size, 2.6 work orders per advisor per day. CP, 1,063, 2.6. CD, 988.31, CD, 3.3. You can see that in general, most shops that have the highest average work order size have the least work orders per advisor, which means they have lots of advisors. To take the time to build relationships, process the inspection information, talk about maintenance, show the value, walk your client through everything takes time. And if you're doing too many invoices, you don't have time to do that. Like it was mentioned before, if you want to calculate this number, figure out this number for your shop, you take the number of work orders in the month, number of days open, number of advisors, and my sample shows 7.15 work orders per advisor per day. Here's the reverse of what I showed you. BB, 294.29, 7 work orders per advisor. Right? 301, LP, 9.4. Now there's a bit of a data glitch here. We have somebody here who is at 501.82 with 16.7 work orders per advisor. They were reporting wrong. By the way, this information here comes out of a business results analysis tool, cloud-based app that we use in our coaching. And he only had himself was one advisor when in reality there was 2 advisors there, and that would have changed that. So the proper work advisor ratio really helps with this number. The effect of this is really the result of improving and reducing the number of single line repair orders. All right. So we track the number of repair orders below 150. What we're looking for is, what we call standalone oil changes, vehicles that are just in and out, no inspections are done. So when you do a lot of those, you get a really poor average work order size. So we have 75 work orders of this shop are 150. The total number of work orders was 192. That's 39% of their work orders were below 150. So that tells us that there's a great opportunity to improve on that, and we have to look at how do we improve that. So again, BB 294.29, lowest of all my clients, average work order size 48.7 of his repair orders are below 150. Right? In, out, in, out. The poor service advisor just can't keep up. They're just giving the client the one thing they need, the oil change, the tire changeover. They're not doing inspections and not capturing the opportunity to look after that car properly. So that leads us then to talk about car count. A lot of people say, how do I get more cars? When in reality, if you pay close attention, usually the busier you get, the less gross profit you make. So it's about making every car count. We measure the data of over 100 shops. I have been coaching shops with numbers for 20 years, and I have gone back and studied this. Of all of our coaching clients over all the years, only 10% barely have a car count problem. Most shops have a problem making every car count. And the proof is in the pudding. PS, 186 cars, 9.3 sold hours per technician per day. CD, 214 cars, right, 6.6 per day. DB, 187. All right. You can see the less work orders, the more billed hours per technician per day. Because think about it. If you as a technician have to deal with 5 cars, that's 5 test drives, 5 on the hoist, off the hoist, test drive park. Where if you're only working on 3 cars, it makes you so much more effective in your workday. So here's the solution, the 400% rule. For the most part, the driving public does not understand how to look after their transportation. I'm not trying to be critical or rude. They just don't understand. They buy a vehicle, they drive it, they know that they have to do oil changes, but they don't realize what it takes to look after a car and make it last a long time. As an industry, we keep asking them if they need anything else. Would you like this? Would you like more? And they're like, no, I don't want to spend any more money on my car. Or we ask them questions they don't know the answer to. Or they think we're trying to sell them things that they're not sure that they need. Because we come at it with a sales approach as opposed to informing and educating our clients about what their vehicle needs. If we behaved more like a professional practice rather than a commodity price-based retail business, we'd be more successful and have more satisfied clients. Our industry has fallen into this spiral of price. Lowest oil change, lowest labor rates, come to me, I'm the cheapest, I'll give you a deal, just to get more cars in the door to be busy, and at the end of the day, we're not that profitable, right? In reality, what we should be doing is attracting the right clients with the right cars, looking after these cars, making them last a long time, and these people are very satisfied with our service. So what we need to do is be consistent in our identifying, our tracking, our presenting, and recording the condition of our clients' vehicles and the best approach to making it last a long time. So we're going to talk about the deferred work cycle known as the 400% rule. Every vehicle coming to our shop gets an inspection. Everything we find we estimate. Everything we estimate we present. Everything that's not purchased that day is deferred to the next visit and is brought into the conversation at the next visit. Let me elaborate. Every vehicle, every time, gets some form of inspection. Now, it could be a basic 5-point inspection with a maintenance service, with a tire repair. It could be a 50-point inspection with a maintenance service. It could be a full pre-purchase inspection or a bumper-to-bumper inspection, annual inspection, but some form of inspection will be done at every visit. The results are reported the same by all the technicians as much as possible. What do good, monitor, recommend, highly recommend, and safety severe mean to you? Are the technicians consistent between themselves? Are they all on the same page? Technicians should not be giving the service advisors a reason to second guess them. So that's point 1. Point 2, everything is estimated, everything is identified, and recommended by the technician is estimated. The service advisors should not be second guessing the technician and should not be pre-qualifying the client. Now, if you think back to number of invoices per advisor, you can see that if you begin to implement the 400% rule, you're going to need more advisors or some support for your existing people if you don't have enough support, because this becomes a lot of work. But the rewards are huge. Number 3, using all of the client expectation qualifying information, the 8 commitments of consultation, which are part of some of my other training. We, of course, bring in previous deferred work. We present everything to the client. Now, depending on the outcome of the qualifying process, we either present the estimates for priority items and the remainder of the list without a price, or the whole estimate with prices. Let me elaborate. This is going to be a lot of information for your client when you send it to them, especially if you're using digital inspection. That's the direction that we want to take this industry in. So if the client is new to you, or if the client is somebody who in the past has been somewhat financially sensitive, we present it in the following manner. Let's say, for example, they've come in for a maintenance service and a brake pulsation. We identify that they need pads and rotors, they need shocks and struts on the front, and they need a timing belt and a water pump. Now, to some people, if you presented all $5,000 worth of that, they would really lose their minds. So what you do is you say your total today with the brake job that we've talked about is going to be less than $850. We do identify that you have shocks and struts that are needed and a timing belt and water pump. Those items we can defer to a future date. You would be, able. The information is at your fingertips. Because what happens if they say to you, "Well, how much is the shocks and struts, or how much is the timing belt?" Right? Then you're prepared to bring it up, and they may say, "Sure. If I leave the car for the week, can you get the rest of it done?" But you also haven't felt like you've been a bully or pushed them over the edge. If it's a fleet or if it's a regular client who gets everything done, then you would then present the whole thing in a dollar value. So that's what I mean by qualifying the client's expectations. And then number 4, we document everything that was deferred, was performed, track the deferred items, and bring it back up in the next visit. And that just gives us an opportunity to look after this car fine. This will take you from a low average work order size to a really healthy work order size, all with ethical, moral work. It's done in a way that is by informing and educating. There's no arm twisting involved here. Clients are engaged in the process of learning how to look after their car. So, in conclusion, one of the ways to improve your service gross profit is the deferred work cycle. Every vehicle gets some form of inspection. Everything we find is estimated. Everything that's estimated is presented. Everything that's not purchased is deferred, and we bring it back up to the next cycle. Looking forward to seeing you in our chapter on improving and maintaining your parts margin. See you again soon.